Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second of my interviews with Rick Maue. I'm not going to describe what's in this conversation because I can't do it justice, not because of me. As we say in this conversation, you've got to be there, and you will be there if you listen to this. I hope you get half as much out of this as I did. It was profoundly beneficial for me for very selfish reasons, but also I think for all of us. Rick is someone that I could listen to for hours and hours and hours, and this is a 2-hour conversation. It's not going to be edited very much. And on that, thank you to Stuart Davis for editing this, and thank you so much to Rick Maue. Please, if you can, this is really important. It'll only take a few seconds, but a very few of the people that listen to this actually subscribe to it. Please do that. It just makes a difference. A lot of people still don't know this podcast exists, and when they do, they kind of send me messages saying, I can't believe I haven't listened to it. And again, that's because of the guests that agreed to do this, not because of me. So if you could just leave us a review, subscribe, and share this, not just for ego purposes, even though it does feel lovely, that'd be wonderful. Follow me on Instagram at Steve Faulkner, and on the YouTube channel, Real Magic Review, and I'll be very, very appreciative. Any comments you've got, I'll do my best to answer them. If I don't, remind me to. It will be absent-mindedness rather than a lack of appreciation. And I hope you enjoy my chat with Rick Maue.
When I put the money in the envelope that says it's got nothing in it, that seems a little bit too obvious, but maybe it's a double bluff. Double bluff. Double bluff. Double bluff. Double bluff. Double bluff. When I put the money in the envelope that says it's got nothing in it, that seems a little bit too obvious, but maybe it's a double bluff.
Okay, Rick, we're here again.
Yes, we are. You are a glutton for punishment, as they say.
I'm not a glutton for punishment. I wanted to, because at the end of the last episode, we were thinking about just carrying on then, right? And then, but I had to get a family and stuff. And then things happened, and I was reluctant to contact you other than to wish you the best. And I don't know how much you want to talk about that or not talk about that. This is all editable, by the way. And but what I was thinking of when I talked to you last time, a lot of the feedback was, as I discovered after watching your penguin lecture, that I'd heard of you, didn't know much about you, and it was a real eye-opener for people, and the feedback was amazing. So I wonder if we should talk about who you are. No, which is a big. That's the one question for the whole podcast. Take it away. You can do the next hour and a half or whatever. No, I think there are things that have happened in your life recently, Rick, that have been important to you because of you know, I've read a few things, and I didn't know whether you wanted to clarify that or talk about that.
Realistically, you know, I battle a lot of health issues, and a lot of folks know that. The folks who are aware of me know that. And the health issues come from a severe brain injury that I suffered back in November of 1996 when my family and I were hit head-on by a drunk driver. And everything sort of goes back to that moment to a great extent from what I have to deal with. But there's a difference between having to deal with it and having it dominate me or define me. And so for my side of things, I've incorporated it into my world. I utilize it when it comes to my creations, when it comes to my art, because there's no reason to hide from it, because it's going to be an obstacle. It's going to be a detour every now and then. It's going to be a dead end now and then. It's going to cause problems. And so it is a part of my persona, but it's not something that holds me back. It's something that just forces me to refocus or recalibrate every so often. And so most recently, I had a very, very bad episode back on the 8th of July that ended up being, I didn't know the extent of it until my lovely wife and I just were at a a neurologist's office this past week. And when she was describing to him what she was dealing with and trying to to help me battle while she was on the phone with the 911 operator and the ambulance was on the way and things like that, she was describing to the neurologist what she dealt with. I didn't realize that the episode lasted like 30 minutes in length. I didn't understand or know any of the stuff that had gone on during it and what she was dealing with. And when she was describing it to the doctor, it seemed like she had it much worse than I did. No question about it. But it was a pretty nasty episode. It was probably the worst one I've ever suffered. And I've been dealing with these types of episodes for 29 years. But that one was pretty rough and was a little more pronounced than other ones. And we now have other specialists getting involved. I mean, that one was bad enough that I dislocated my left shoulder during it. You know, that's gives you an idea of the intensity of the seizure or the episode. And so it just is what it is. And it scrambles your brain. Like one of the things I'm fighting right now is, man, it's almost impossible for me to read. I don't recognize words. I'm having a very difficult time. I can sit down and I can't write the way that I normally do, because normally my everyday exercise is I get up and the first thing I do is I write, 5,000 to 10,000 words just to do it. And not on any specific subject, but on any, subject that I grab arbitrarily. And I just exercise the writing muscle. I've done that for many, many years. And the reason I do that is because then whenever I have something specific that I want to write about, the muscle's already limber. It's ready to go. And if you get past that point of the obstacle of the process of writing, as soon as you have a subject that you do truly care about, you're passionate about, or you really wish to express your views, man, it comes very, very easily. And so I exercise that muscle every day. And like I said, it's a small amount. If I only write 5,000 words in the first, hour that I'm up out of bed and trying to exercise that muscle. I just recently, yesterday, I guess, finished off a very short essay that I had been writing for the past 4.5 to 5 days. It's 500 words, and I was having a hell of a time trying to get it done. And I can type a few words in, I can scribble them out on a notepad, I can do whatever. The one thing I can't do is read them back. As soon as I write them, I look at them and I don't know what they say, because my brain's just not quite focused yet. It's still scrambled from this most recent episode. So I'm having a tough time with that stuff, but it's not a big deal. You just move forward. You don't let this stuff stress you out. Even though it does stress you beneath the surface and you do have to deal with it and everything else, the goal is never to take any of it personally. That's the key. The key to my life is I do everything in third person. When I talk about my mentalism character, I talk about that character in third person. He's not me. As you've heard me talk about, wearing different hats, being different personas. Everything is a different persona for me. I don't take anything personally. And so all of my medical stuff, I don't take it personally. I look at it from the standpoint that guy is a patient. He deals with all of the medical situations. And I take 2 or 3 or 4 steps back from him, and I look at him as objectively as I can. And even though some of that stuff does get into your into your brain a little bit and does wig you out and does mess you up on occasion and stuff like that, certainly can cause stress and anxiety. The key is, for the majority of the time, don't take any of it personally. And that's the key to everything in life, from what I have found. It's, to segue it into magic, mentalism, creativity, and everything else. That's the key to all of those things. The key to being able to do the things that I do as a performer, as a creator, as a writer, and everything else. It all comes down to the fact that none of those people who do those things are me. They are personas. And they are personas that I have intentionally manufactured and dissected and understood. And that doesn't mean that they're phony. What it means is they're more realistic than they normally would be if I just let them happen, generically and naturally, because I actually have intent behind the things that I do. And intent is a huge part of my life. And so that's what drives most of my creations and everything else. I had someone that asked me, I guess about 5 or 6 weeks ago, somebody called me up and they had some questions, and it was a person I didn't really know real well. They just wanted to talk about some things. And they opened with a question that I thought was rather interesting, because they had all these specific things they wanted to talk about. And they said, in your opinion, what's magic? And I thought to myself, well, that's a question that I can answer in a single sentence, or that's a question I can start answering now, and we won't finish it for the rest of any of our lives. But to me, that's kind of a really good question, for the simple fact that if we explore a question like what's magic, what is magic, that's all we have to do is take the structure of that exploration, and we can now apply it to every other subject in the world. Because it's not about the specific answer to that question. It's about how we arrive at the answer for that question, the personal answer that we have for ourselves, the thing that drives us, the thing that gives us our passion, the thing that gives us our intentions. And so when someone asks me, what is magic? Sure, that answer is significant to how I see that specific subject. But the way that I get to how I see it shows you whether I've thought about it in depth, or whether it's something that's frivolous, whether it's something that's just on the surface and I'm just reacting in the moment. You see that in so many subjects of today, where you talk to people about things and they throw something off the top of their head, but you can tell they haven't thought about it. You can tell they haven't lived it. You can tell it's not essential in their life. You can tell it's not something that they have specific intent. And my life is driven very, very much by specific intent. I think about things constantly. So, with that said, if you want to start out, we can start with, what is magic? We can both throw out answers and go down that path and go from there.
Yeah, and I love and mirroring that. When I asked you the question at the beginning, who are you? I'm so glad you just gave that answer, because you talk about identity and about the things that the challenges you're having to work with not being your identity. And I think your identity to me, and this isn't a question, this is a comment, conversational comment, your identity to me is almost the opposite of that. It's someone that's defined by not being defined by the challenges, and also not being defined by the labels of magician or mentalist and intention. I want to look at that. I want to look at what is magic. Don't let me not go there in a minute. But I want to know about intention, because intention can be something we have, or we think we have, or we have because we should do, or it's not our own intention, it's someone else's intention for us. Last time we spoke, you spoke about the inspiration, and you spoke about Harry Chapin musically and poetically, I think, and in a kind of mentor way. But you also mentioned books and poetry, and I'd love to know where that intention, do you think it comes from? Does it come from inspiration, or does it come from experience? Obviously, it's all of those things, but do things spring to mind when I say that?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, intention for me is more along the lines of, how am I going to deliver how am I going to deliver to another person, or to a project, or to any other thing that I'm doing? How do I deliver that? That's the, and why? That's a lot of it. As for the inspiration and everything else, the inspiration is connected directly to my passion. As I've said for years, and as I believe we spoke about last time, being inspired is very essential for me, but that's so different than being influenced. I certainly don't want to be influenced, because influence for me is, taking on the characteristics, the traits, the intentions, and everything else of others. And although I think that can be valuable in a lot of cases, that's not valuable from a creative standpoint. It might be valuable from the standpoint of, once again, trying to accomplish something or having a specific intention. But for me, since a lot of my life is driven by pure creativity, and it's not about making products that people will like, it's not about doing shows that will make them laugh or applaud. It's never about the output, doing something specific that, the intention is to be successful, to be famous, to be, to become, rich, or to have people like what I do. I never have had that as an intention in my life. Never. And that just doesn't drive me. That's why 95% of the things that I create just for me, and no one ever sees them. No one ever hears them. No one ever reads them. Because that's more important to me. I'm doing it for the pure passion and the pure creativity.
And it's that difference between inspiration and influence, I think I'm interested in on a selfish level, because I think I'm not just speaking for myself, but sometimes I feel like I've been inspired, but I've actually been influenced, right? And you started last time saying that you spend a lot of time on your own because you're easily influenced, and I don't want to kind of do a carbon copy of what we talked about before, but that influence, just taking something really solid and concrete and a kind of, say a routine like the cups and balls. Okay, so I was inspired by, but looking back, I was influenced, not in a manipulative way, but in a kind of taking the easy path, right? Influence that works. It works for them. I've had their blessing to do it. So, and yes, there are bits of me that go into it, but I'm starting now to try and unpick that influence and make it go back to inspiration. And that's hard, right? If you've been so influenced, and I think age is something to do with it, you get to a point of really asking the question I asked you at the beginning is actually, who am I? What do I want? And that can be so clouded by influence that you don't know, right? So there has to be exercises, and for me at the moment it's meditation, to work towards a process of not answering the question, because I don't think I ever will, but to get closer to it. And have you ever experienced that, or have you always been mindful of it and kind of not let yourself get there? Or have you ever had to unpick? Have you ever found yourself doing something and going, hang on a minute, this is a bit like I'm writing a Harry Chapin song here.
Well, let's tie some of these things together, because I think then they may make a little bit more sense because they'll be in context. Influence and intent. Let's tie those together. Let's talk about them as the same thing. Yeah. As I mentioned before, the one thing that I do try to avoid is linear learning, what I've always called linear learning. I think it's a death trap for me. And once again, linear learning is, a painter that only wants to learn from other painters, a poet that only wants to learn from other poets, a magician or mentalist that only wants to learn from another magician or mentalist. That's why I always tell people I've never read mentalism books. I simply won't, because I don't want to be influenced by what's out there. Now, that is because of one thing. That's because I understand my intent. My intent is not to make a great mentalism show that will make me a lot of money and get me booked. If that were my intention, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with influence. Tie it back into the cups and balls. If you're doing the cups and balls and you're trying to do it for shows and you're trying to get shows booked and you're trying to become someone that audiences want to see over and over again, and you want to get additional gigs and you want to pay the bills and feed the family, then there's absolutely, believe me, there's nothing wrong with influence. There's nothing wrong with standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before us. Absolutely not. The intent at that point is to be a performer and to be a professional paid performer. That's a different intent than what I have. Now, I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I'm certainly not judging that, because most of my closest friends in the world are doing exactly that. And that's why we work together to help build their shows and to help get them gigs. It's why I talk to them about marketing and things like that. It's why I teach them the things that I used to do in the corporate world. All of that stuff is essential. But that's because the intention at that point is to put on a show that is pleasing, a show that is entertaining, a show that is engaging, and a show that will be successful financially. If that's the goal, then there's absolutely nothing wrong in any way, shape, or form with looking at influence. My goal in my world, especially for the past 30 years, has been to explore my own creativity. If I'm looking to explore my own creativity, I want to stay the hell away from everybody else's influence. I don't want anything that's linear. I don't want to learn magic and mentalism from magicians or mentalists. Not that there's anything wrong with any other magicians or mentalists. Some of my best friends in the world are some of the best magicians and mentalists on the planet. But if I try to learn from what they're doing, it's going to taint my creativity. That is why my influences are diminished. My inspirations have been dramatically increased. And so I can be inspired by Marcel Duchamp. I can be inspired by Yoko Ono. I can be inspired by Carl Sagan. I can be inspired by Justin Townes Earl, Harry Chapin. I can be inspired by so many different people. And the goal is always the same. The goal is, what are these people teaching me about life and about passion and about a love of what I do? And then from there, if we go back to that other question that the other gentleman asked me about what is magic, then magic is just exactly what I see it as. Magic is a courier at best. Magic is Federal Express. Magic is DHL. Magic is UPS. It's the Postal Service. It's just a delivery system. Because if I have inspiration, and that inspiration brings something about inside of me, and I start to create something. What I'm creating is the passion, the message, the actual basis of why I care about this subject in that moment. Whether I then deliver that in a magic trick, a mentalism piece, a poem, an essay, a photograph, it doesn't matter, because all of those are just delivery systems. They're all just couriers. Magic means nothing to me from the standpoint of I'm going to sit here and manufacture something that will fool somebody. I did that in my youth, and I did it. I have thousands of effects that I've created, thousands of them. They're all sitting in folders and files and notebooks and things like that. They mean nothing to me. You know, I show them every now and then, or I show a few things to friends of mine that I did when I was, back in my teens or back when I was in my 20s or whatever. And people are like, oh, you really need to release this stuff. And I said, why would I bother? It doesn't mean anything to me. There's no passion for it. It's just mechanics. And the idea of fooling somebody doesn't enter into my intention in any way, shape, or form. Now, if I'm going to incorporate a piece of magic or mentalism into a show that I'm writing, and those pieces that I insert are put in long after the fact, the show is written first, and then I look at certain things and say, I'd like to illustrate this point. I'd like to emphasize this point. I would like to create a mnemonic here that will make people remember this specific lesson. Those things now give me the opportunity to piece together magical style effects, mentalism effects, whatever, that I can use as illustrations and as punctuation and as emphasis and as metaphor and as mnemonics. Then I create those magical pieces that will give texture to that storyline that I'm trying to share. And so those pieces, to be defined as magic or mentalism, the defining characteristic is we, quote, fool somebody with what we do. They don't know how it works. So yeah, then I want that piece to be a strong piece, but it's not with the intention of fooling them. It's with the intention of being a part of that specific courier system. It is a piece of magic as opposed to a poem or as opposed to a photograph. It is that type of delivery system. I'm delivering the message with a piece of magic. But that piece of magic is not there to just fool people. It's there to act as that mnemonic, or as that metaphor, or as that punctuation, or as that illustration, or whatever. So its intention is not to fool people. Its intention at that point is to carry across the passionate message that I'm wishing to share. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And there's so much doubt. And it brings to mind a couple of things. Being someone who reviews products and books and lots of different things, I'm always struck by this idea of how fooling something is. And to me, surely if somebody, there has to be a obviously there's a when you're working on any effect, that, like you say, the criteria has to be that if it is a mentalism effect or magic effect, it has to be, if you decide, right, I'm going to do this piece of mentalism, what makes it that is that they don't go, I know exactly how that's done. So there's a kind of...
Right, that's the
it's
defining
a default,
characteristic.
Right? Yeah. So,
right.
So we don't have to go too into that. But then there are tricks that I've done and I think, well, that's fooled them more. But surely it can't fool them more because if they don't know how it's done, they don't know how it's done, right? I mean, so it either does or it doesn't. Now, if it's something that they think, well, I kind of think that could, then I suppose it hasn't fooled them, but that may be different. And a good example, I think, is a couple of examples. I took a trick that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I was scared of doing it, and I talked about it on a podcast and stuff, which is Tobias Dostal's optics. Okay, you borrow a mobile phone, you ask them to put it on record, and you say you're going to, and you take the phone and it's recording, and you hold their phone and you give them your phone and you say, record this on mine. Okay, and as they're recording, you make their phone vanish, and they realise that the phone that they're recording you on is now theirs. And up to that point now, so great, right? Now, the responses from that were the responses you get. I always think the difference between mentalism and magic is that they don't go, yay, they kind of go, that it's so unbelievable, etc., etc. But it's no more fooling because they've stopped at the bit they don't know how it's done, but it's the other stuff that I think makes it more powerful, which isn't they even more don't know how it's done. It's the novelty, it's the interest that's sparked by that moment and the surprise. And I suppose I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we have to stop saying, is it more and more fooling? We have to say, how interesting is it? Is it not just, he didn't know my card? You know, because the perfect trick would be in that respect, wouldn't it? Name a card, think of a card and name it. But we all know that's kind of boring. It's the most fooling thing because there's nowhere to go with it. But it lacks. And for me, what you're saying is the magic, the interest, the moment, the whatever we want to call it, is not in the strength of the thing, because there's only a certain strength. It's in how we get there. And I suppose that's different to all of us. Now, the second example is that I was visited yesterday by Manuel Luarte and Anna, who is going to bring out this book, which is about that. It's about the stuff of how do we make... it's not propless mentalism, as people call it, where you go through some tedious 10-hour thing to say something they might be thinking of. But it's kind of born of that, but it's to make that a more concise thing. And he performed a couple of routines on me. Now, I'm someone that loves performing mentalism, but mostly bored senseless by it. And I was taken on a journey with him, and I don't know him well enough to be him, so it's kind of felt like I was a spectator, and he took me on. There was a process, but in that process it became, and this is not the magician in me, because my mind was a layperson by the time I was halfway through it became almost irrelevant at how fooling this was going to be. Now, when he did say the date you're thinking of, it's in October, right, there was that moment of magical kind of tingliness that we want, but that wasn't the be all and end all. And actually, it became less important. It was the journey I was taken on, and that was a lovely icing on the cake that made it a bit more special. And I think it's not a comment, it's more of a comment than a question, but for me, I'm starting to learn at the age of 52, 51, something, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And is that close to what you're saying, or is there a different thing?
It's certainly related. It's certainly related because for me, the goal is always the same. The goal is always communication. The goal is always somehow reaching out. If I'm creating a piece that's going to be performed, the goal is to reach out to every person in that audience as an individual and touch them in some way. That's the goal. Now, the key to it is I'm smart enough to realize that no two people in any audience will ever experience 100% of exactly what I'm intending. And no two people in there will ever experience the same thing as anybody else in that audience. No one, everyone gets their own experience from everything. Every moment of life, every moment of every human life is unique to that specific person. There is no such thing as a shared experience because of all of the internal filters that we have, all of our experiences, our experience itself, our knowledge base, our passions, our vision of this or that. I mean, everything makes every moment of life unique to us. There's no such thing as a shared human experience. So the goal for me isn't to give everybody the same experience, because that's never going to happen. The goal is to take them all down that path and let them do what they want with it from that point forward. And so, yes, do I want my pieces to, quote, fool the audience? Sure, because that's what makes them magic or mentalism if I'm doing a magic or mentalism show. Or if I'm incorporating any magic or mentalism into one of my monologues or any other presentations that I'm doing or whatever. Those pieces do have to have that element that, quote, fools the audience, unquote. But the goal is to take them on a journey. The goal is to give them something relevant. The goal is to put something in context so that those pieces have more to them than that. And to a great extent, this leads me onto a point that I had mentioned to you briefly before we got into our conversation, just going back and forth with our messages. And that's one of the reasons why I personally, and I'm not saying this for anybody else, once again, to clarify, anything that I state is not me stating it for magicians or mentalists in general. I'm stating it for me, and I'm stating it for me in this moment, because 2 days from now, I could feel differently on any of these subjects, because that's the key to being a good critical thinker, is you don't get locked into something and believe it for the rest of your life. I don't believe anything. I have confidence in things. Belief is for weaklings in every way, shape, or form, because it means you're following something without the need for facts or true information. But so I don't believe anything. But that being said, we have that belief. We have to fool people. We have to do this. We have to do that. We have all of these different things. And one of the things that I feel strongly about, I don't like to do things that are, quote, impossible. I'd rather do things that are improbable. They're more compelling in my world. I think they're more compelling for my audiences because of the way that they get delivered in the context of my shows. Because impossible leads us onto a path that, for me personally, is a dead end. Now, think about it this way. Like I open my show with a 7-minute monologue that ends in a 50-50 chance. It's not a stunner when it comes to fooling people, but it's become a signature piece that people talk to me about all the time. It's the one that to this day I'm so proud of, that Max Maven came up to me and said, I never say this to anybody, but your opening piece that you did, I would do that exactly as you do it, word for word, and I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, that knocked me, on my ass when Max said that to me. I don't think I've ever received a better comment. And yet it's a 50-50 chance. It certainly isn't a, quote, fooler. But the key to that 50-50 chance is it puts the rest of my show into context. It introduces my character very, very effectively. It introduces my concept very effectively. It introduces my theme very effectively. And it also makes people go, whoa, because there's a human element to it. They're attached to it. But when I'm done with it, the thing that's really important is I say flat out, I open each and every one of my performances with that exact same demonstration. Now, what I've just said to those people without saying it outright is I get this right every night. Night after night after night after night. If I did this 1,000 times, I get it right 1,000 times. That's technically what I'm saying to them. That's the underlying message. For those who understand that, great. For those who don't, I'll be a little bit more specific and a little bit more pointed that they'll get that point as we go forward. But that's foreshadowing at that point, that moment of, yeah, I get this stuff right every time. So now, even though it's a 50-50 chance and it's not impossible, it's only merely improbable. If you do something that's 50-50, every single time you get it right, that's virtually impossible. That's what makes it compelling to me. Because if I do something that is strictly impossible, the only question they can have in their mind is, how did that happen? How did he do that? If I do something that's improbable, they can have more philosophical questions. They can have more questions that are in depth. They can go down different paths. It's not so binary. It's not one or the other. It's not so easy to figure out why I'm doing it. It's not so easy to figure out what it means. It's not so easy to figure out why it's perplexing to them. I want to start them in a conversation and engage them in an exchange. I don't want to simply fool them. If a magician walks out on stage and they show their hand completely empty on both sides, obviously empty, and that magician closes their hand, there's no tricky movement, there's no unusual things that happen, and they just open their hand again and there's a large coin in the center of that hand. That's impossible. But here's the problem. If that's what you do in the opening 10 seconds of your show, the rest of your show is now 100% redundant. You've just proven you can do the impossible, so everything else that you do from this point forward proves it again, and proves it again, and proves it again. Whether we're making the lady float, whether we're making something appear, making something disappear, making something penetrate something, it doesn't matter. If that's all you continue to do is prove you can do the impossible, we're being redundant. Now, I understand people are going to throw in some jokes and some dance moves and some mylar curtains and whatever else to make it entertaining. But as I've said to you before, I don't care about being entertaining. Entertainment is a dime a dozen. Anything can be entertaining. People can pick up their stupid phone and play some stupid video game on there and be entertained for 12 hours in a row. I have no interest in entertainment. I want to engage them. I want them to go deeper than that. I want them to try and really get deeper into the context. I want them to get deeper into the content. I want them to see how this reflects their own life back to them, so that they're not just seeing an ability that I have, but they're seeing how it pertains to them and how they can take it personally and what they can take away learning about themselves. That's things I care about. I've always talked about, there's an old TV show here in the States that ran for a number of years. It was called Bewitched. And Bewitched was this, beautiful blonde housewife married to this, I believe he was a corporate executive of some type. I think he was in advertising or something. And she was a witch. And so, things would happen. She could make things happen. She could make things appear or disappear. She could turn someone into a horse. She could turn back time. She could do anything. She could create all these impossible things. And those were the things that caused conflict in storylines and eventually caused the resolution. It's what caused conflict in the relationship. It was the stuff that actually put texture into the human element of the story. The reason that show lasted for all of those seasons was because it was put into context and it was involving the human element of the story. If every week it was just the special effects that, they would turn on the camera and she would turn someone into a horse and she would make a pot of gold appear, they would have been done after one show because no one would have tuned in, because no one would have cared. That's the way I look at magic and mentalism. If we're just playing the person who can do the impossible, but we're not putting into a human context, not putting into a storyline that applies to every other person's life in some form, that they can't see, they're not just seeing, this impossible thing, but instead they're seeing how it reflects their life. They're learning about themselves. They're getting something from it. If we're not giving them that, then we're giving them frivolous surface entertainment, and that's not enough for me. And so I never wanted to create that. I want to create the storyline that puts it into context for them.
And I wonder if there's, because some people will be listening to that and playing devil's advocate, saying, well, yeah, well, and I'm saying this is an open thing, so I don't necessarily want an answer yet for this, but they'll say, okay, yeah, but I'm a close-up magician. As you said, with intent, I want to get gigs. I get 2 minutes at a table, which is the reality sometimes. So
Absolutely.
we know there's a place for the dirty cheeseburger sometimes, but we want to concentrate on making a nice meal. But now and then we have a bag of chips and
Oh,
a dirty
absolutely.
cheeseburger. Fine, and I'm not saying that close-up magic's like a dirty cheeseburger, because it can be, as I was talking about with Tobias's trick. That moment can be a very wonderful moment, but it isn't the
Without
deeper
question.
thing, right? So I wonder whether a lot of us really, even some of us, and I'll speak for myself a few years ago, don't know it, but we are all kind of maybe working towards that subconsciously, and why so many of us get more than bored with doing close-up gigs. It's not boredom. We can deal with boredom. It's almost, for me, I always talk about, it's like an anxiety. It's like after 2 hours, it's like I cannot do one more trick. And that's not laziness. I can do hours of work. There's something else going on there. And I wonder whether most of us really, whether it's age or repetition of doing magic or losing the thing that first sparked us when we saw something and felt something, are looking for a way to do that, but don't know where to start with it, right? We are, like you said, it comes from our situation, our history, our past. Maybe we were never around people, like I wasn't for the first, I don't know, most of my school life, until I met people that read books that were influenced by different things, that maybe they're lacking that thing. And it doesn't have to be a really deep hours and hours of submerging yourself into highly academic, that can be a mistake. It can be a subtle, beautiful, lovely thing. It can be something you see and connect with. And I suppose it's being open to the things you already, and I'm thinking aloud, so this isn't going to end up in a nice pretty bow or anything, but it's that thing of being open to the day-to-day, not just the more esoteric journeys that we do end up finding ourselves going down, whether that's reading, whether that's, poetry, whether that's psychedelics, whatever it is. That's a very personal thing. But is there a way to, rhetorically, I suppose I'm saying that, a way to just start off in what we've got, right? Change our mindset and change our paradigm and reframe what's already around us. Have you done a lot of that? Because you said you sit in that room, right? So you're sitting in that room like you do a lot, Dave. So,
Absolutely.
but new things come in. So is that part of that process for you?
Well, it is, but let's go back to where that came from. What the early days looked like. There was a time many years ago that I was doing that strolling stuff. Before I lost the use of my hands because of the nerve damage that I suffered from the head injury and the neck injury back in '96. I was a sleight of hand guy, and so my experience back then, although I was doing other things, my experience from the age of 5 when I started doing magic, and by the age of 8 when I was creating my own effects, a lot of that was based in sleight of hand. And when I was relatively young, when I was a teenager and going into my 20s, I did a lot of strolling gigs. And so I knew that environment. I know what it's like to have 2 minutes. I know what it's like to have 3 minutes with a group of people. And so I know for a fact that even back then, there were 2 things I wanted to avoid. The first thing I wanted to avoid was I didn't want to manipulate people into watching magic. I wanted to be proud of what I did, and I wanted them to be happy to see it. I didn't want to be the person who forced my way in through false pretenses. The proverbial, excuse me, did anybody here you lose a red knife? How about a white one? Oh, for God's sake, be proud of what you do. Introduce yourself and invite them into your world for 3 minutes and tell them that you're there to give them a very quick thing and move on. Be proud of what you do. Don't manipulate people into don't do the, if I borrow their $20 bill, then they can't leave because they didn't get their 20 back until the end of the show. They're stuck there. I can't live with that stuff. I could never do that stuff. My goal was always to be proud of what I did and to always be giving someone the opportunity to share in what I was doing and giving them something that they would take away that would be beneficial for them. That was number 1. Number 2 was, and I don't mean this from an ego standpoint because it has nothing to do with ego. they had to be there for me, not for the tricks. Because if they're there for the tricks, I'm wasting my time. You want me to tell you a story from my life from many years ago?
Oh, I love the stories. Of course I do. You know the answer to that question.
This is quite some time ago. This was when I was still working in the corporate world. So I don't even remember the exact year this happened, but it would have been sometime probably in the early 80s. I'm standing at a social function that was related to some of my business contacts. And I don't know most of the people in the room. I know a few business contacts. Everybody else, I have no clue who they are. There's a person standing next to me who is one of my corporate contacts. There's a collection of folks standing around. And this person says, "Did you folks know that Rick is a magician?" The girl standing off to my side all of a sudden bursts like into the center of the space, and she goes, "Oh my God, I saw a magician once. We were out in Los Angeles, California. I was with my girlfriend Sherry, and we were at the we were out at the Hilton out there, and we were at this big gathering of corporate people, and this guy came over to us. He was wearing this tuxedo, and he came walking over, and he started to like pretend that he was shuffling a deck of cards, but he had nothing in his hands whatsoever. But he kept pretending he was shuffling a deck of cards, and I thought he was just fooling around. I thought he was just kind of being a silly man. But he kept persisting that he had this deck of cards, and he kept on trying to get me to take one of these cards. And so I finally went along with it, and I took one of the cards, and he was wearing this weird tuxedo and stuff like that. So I had no idea who he was, but I took one of the cards, and then he took it and he put it back in the deck. But when he put it back in the deck, he turned it upside down, he said, and he started to shuffle the cards up again. And after he did that for a while, he then took the cards and he took this deck of cards that didn't even exist any place. It was just in his imagination, and he threw it over his shoulder, and that was the whole thing. I thought it was just a big joke and big laugh, and I didn't think anything else of it. And I just thought, oh, what a silly guy. And next thing I know, he said to me, he said, "What was the card that you just looked at?" And I didn't really look at a card, so I had to make one up, and I told him it was the 7 of hearts. And so he reached into his pocket, he took out a real deck of cards, took them out of the box, he went through the deck, and every single card, every one was face up except one card was upside down. Oh my God, the only card that was upside down, it was the 7 of hearts. Can you believe it? Now, when people tell you that kind of story, they usually follow that up with one of two questions. They either follow it up with, "So can you do that?" or "How did he do that?" Those are the only two questions you usually get. Now, when someone tells me that kind of story, my first thing is I try to match their level of enthusiasm. And I go, "Oh my God, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. I just have one question for you. The guy who did that, what was his name?" And they always go, "Oh, I don't know." Now let's think about this. She remembered the city that she was visiting. She remembered the person she was standing with. She remembered the hotel they were at. She remembered what the guy was wearing. She remembers the card trick and jokes that he played on her. She remembers the card that she said it was. She remembers all of these details. The one thing she doesn't have any clue is she doesn't know the guy's name. How's he going to get rebooked? Oh, wait, don't worry. We've narrowed it down. It's a guy on the west coast of United States who does the invisible deck. That's easy. We'll be able to find him. I mean, for God's sake, if she doesn't know who he was, the guy wasted his time. It's always about me, not because I'm important, but because that's the human connection. If I don't make that human connection, I'm going to be that bozo doing the invisible deck that's never going to get rebooked because no one knows who the hell he is. And so the goal is always to make it about the performer, make it about you, and then share something that you're passionate about that will put value in their life. So something that simple makes all the sense in the world to me of how do we make it about us in 2 or 3 minutes? And I had many ways to do that. Many ways to do that. One of the ways that I used to do it consistently was I would walk up to somebody and I would say, I don't mean to interrupt, but the management has asked me to share some things with everyone here. Here's what they'd like me to share. Boom. And I'd pluck a coin out of midair. And I'd say, that's for you. and I'd let them take that coin. And I'd say, this is the passion that I've had for many, many years. What are some of your passions? Hi, I'm Rick, by the way. Okay, now we've engaged. We're now 40 seconds in, and now I have the open door to do something else for them. I have the open door to, quote, fool them. I have the open door to entertain them. More importantly, I have the open door to engage with them. And now whenever we go away, whenever we part 3 minutes later, they've had a human experience. They've had something that they can retain that is connectivity. It's not just this guy did this bit, did this joke. Who was he? I don't know. And it wasn't under false pretenses. That's one of the things I love most about doing strolling stuff. When I would go back and do strolling gigs for my corporate clients on a regular basis, there was nothing better. You know that you are a successful strolling performer when you can approach a group of people, or when they call you over and you spend time with them and they don't want to see a single effect. They just want to talk with you. That's when you're good. If you don't get to that level, you're missing it. You're missing out. You're not doing your job. Plain and simple, because it shouldn't be about the effects. And the best thing about that is whenever those folks just want to call you over and they ask the question that you asked earlier, who are you? When they want to know about me, when they want to know our experiences, when they want to talk to us as people, and you do that for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then you have to move on and you say, you know what, I hate to say it, I have to move along. I have a lot of folks I have to meet with this evening, but before I leave, I want to give you guys something special. And you give them that one piece of magic at that point. That magic doesn't just fool them. It can bring tears to their eyes because you just gave them something special. That's so much better.
Yeah, I'm always questioning this. You know, you mentioned it being about you and that not being an ego-driven thing. And I'm always asking myself, am I doing this for them? Am I doing it for my ego? And for me, I think it's a blend of both. There has to be something internal fulfilled, right? So in the way, it's a healthy side of ego, right? It's a healthy ego. It's a thing of it has to be a win-win. And I love that thing of seeing everything, going to Stephen Covey, think win-win. It's not about negotiation. It's about just think win-win. If we're both equally, or they're getting a bit more, maybe, then we're all happy, and then that fuels the whole loop, right? The connection, because you could go the Buddhist way of going, I am of service, and I will take on your pain, and it's irrelevant how I feel, which is, you know, incredible, but for most of us, not a reality, or not something that can sustain us in some respects, other than with the people I suppose that are very closest to us. But even then, I suppose you're, you know, the classic thing of the person that spends their life in service as working for charities. You know, it's sometimes sneered upon that they might get paid a bit of money that will sustain that work. And it's like, and it's like, no, that's okay. But there's a level of, as Mark Obi says in his new book, there's a time where it becomes your enemy, that ego, and it closes down that thing. And I suppose the nuance of that being those times when it's totally not about me reminds me of an idea I had the other day, which I put on my website, because I hate the idea of marketing myself saying I'm brilliant, you know, that thing. So I kind of went the other way for some strolling gigs of saying, and I'm not saying this because it's great, I'm just saying it to me, it's kind of taking what you said and flipping it, of saying, okay, your event is about you. You want people to remember your corporate event. And whenever you see something amazing, what's the first thing you say when you retell the story? You say, I was at. So the whole idea of me being there is not about me. It's about people saying, I saw this amazing thing at, and remembering the party. And that becomes the focus. Now, it doesn't mean when I'm performing it then doesn't become about me, and it becomes about us and becomes about but the sales pitch is the opposite to what most, and I'm not saying it's going to work, but most people do is go, I'm going to be amazing. They're going to think I'm amazing. It's going, no, they're going to think your event's amazing because it's one of the many things happening at the event. And I'm always battling that thing of like the show I'm putting together now, which is very much what I want to do. But I have to remember that they're involved, right? have to kind of go. It's not just me doing the creative masturbation on stage and drawing a painting with my own feces. It's kind of, you know, and for those that don't know, that is a thing. You know, I'm not. That isn't just some perverse thing that's come out of my head. So it's that balance, isn't it? And I think that when we get to a point where we've made that decision to go, okay, yes, I'll do the things that are paying the bills, but the real drive to stop me going insane is to start fulfilling this thing that is a communications based, that is deeper than just whatever it is, art or something else. Then how do we stop ourselves getting carried away and going over that threshold of being the kind of somebody that's doing Edinburgh shows in front of 3 people, you know, because we've lost, you know, it happens to performers a lot. I've seen it, you know.
Yeah, without question. I mean, once again, a lot of this comes back to that same word over and over again, the word intent. You know, it's not uncommon for me to take out a notebook and grab a pen and make a list of intentions. Here's the things that I'm looking to accomplish. And it's not a to-do list, but it's the different intents. You know, if indeed I'm doing a theater show, I'm doing a theater show for several reasons. The first reason I'm doing a theater show is because of the message that I've put into it, the passion that I have for that specific subject. And to me, it doesn't matter if there's one person in the audience, 100 people in the audience, or 1,000 people in the audience. It doesn't matter. I'm doing that show for that reason. The other intention is, if I'm doing that theater show, that means there's going to be other folks involved, and I have to make it worth their while. I have to make it worth their while from the standpoint of the financial side of things. And so crowd size does matter. And so, you know, I have to figure that out. I need to have all of these specific intentions, and I have to be able to check every one of those boxes. And there has to be a certain level of compromise. And so one of the things that I realized many years ago, if everything else is equal with 2 performers, why do we have a difference between a starving artist and a successful artist? Well, if everything between those 2 is 100% equal, the one thing is usually the successful artist is willing to compromise. The starving artist is not. And so whenever I do a public presentation of any type, there's always going to be some compromise. That compromise is going to come in the form of some of the content, possibly, some of the structure, some of the balance of the storyline or message or passion that I wish to share versus performance pieces. There's always going to be a bit of compromise. That compromise has to be within reason, otherwise I won't do it. Plain and simple. And that's always been the case. And so when I was in the corporate world, doing corporate seminars and being very successful, there was a lot more artistic and creative compromise back then. There was not compromise from the standpoint of what I would or would not do. You know, I have an infamous story that I've told people for years that I won't bore you with now, of being offered a huge contract to do corporate seminars for the tobacco industry. And I spent a lot of money to fly to a meeting in the southern part of the United States to meet with those people, strictly so I could, and they had the contract there ready for me to sign. It was huge. It was the largest contract I was ever offered. I flew there at my own expense to tell them that they could go fuck themselves because they kill people with their products. And no matter how much money they were willing to give me, I wasn't willing to participate in them murdering people with their tobacco. And I walked out. And it was very worthwhile because that's a compromise I wasn't willing to make, plain and simple. Because there has to, you know, the one thing that is important to me to a great extent, and it's a bullshit word for a lot of people, and it's one that we kind of misuse in a lot of cases, but there has to be some integrity somewhere. You know, I know that that's something that's been lost in the United States in the past few months in a lot of cases, but we don't have to get on that path. But integrity stands for something in my world. It really does. It's the reason why the people that are my greatest inspirations. Some of the folks I mentioned earlier, whether it's, Harry Chapin or whether it's Carl Sagan or, those folks, there's great integrity with just about all of them. And so that's important to me. But there also has to be compromise. And if you're looking to take your art and turn it into a business, that very first decision of I want my art to become something that I can monetize, that automatically says compromise. Otherwise, what you have is most likely not really art. It's more craft. It's a show of skill. It's a show of, a display of talent. That's not art for me. That's not the same thing as art. And I'm not defining art for anybody else. Once again, I'm defining it for me. But, I'm not real interested in displays of talent and skill and things like that. That's a waste of time for me. That stuff bores me. But on the other side of things, if you're truly willing to share your vision, your passions, the things that you care about, then you're going to have to compromise to a certain degree if you want to bring that to a large audience or to a paying audience. And so be willing to look at those compromises and make those lists of what your intentions are and adhere to them.
Yeah, I suppose to me, the idea of compromise is it depends on the journey, doesn't it? Because if you're someone that I know people that went straight from doing magic for 6 months and go, right, I want to make loads of money out of this now. So I suppose in their mind, there's no compromise because they've gone into it a different way, right? They've gone into it saying,
well, once again, I'm guessing that's not art.
No,
I'm guessing that's not art. At least from my view of what art is. I'm not judging them or telling them what they do isn't art. I'm not saying that. My view of that is, if that were me personally, because I don't care what they do, I have to look at if I were in that position. If I were in that position, I wouldn't consider any of the things I was doing at that point as art. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, but what it means is it's not art. And so my intentions are different.
Yeah. And I think there's a personal thing as well of when I started working in the street, I very quickly had to make money, right? So I made loads of compromises, and that was fine for a few years because my internal sort of dissonance was, okay, I'm doing this kind of hack stuff, but around it I can start learning to improvise, which I kind of did, but let's be honest, I just wanted to make a buck and I didn't want a proper job. So
sure.
And I wanted to work half an hour a day, but that became something else. That's unsustainable. And I think by the journey, I mean, you take someone like, the two people come to mind, okay? A guy called Sean Gandini. Now, Sean Gandini was a juggler because I started as a juggler, and he was like the young Anthony Gatto. He was, in the UK, he was like the young kid who could juggle 5 clubs, the display of skill. And at one point, he took the decision, I'm not saying it was a quick decision, but from the outside, and when you saw him on stage, all of a sudden, he was performing dance pieces, very kind of contemporary dance pieces. The skill level, or the obvious skill level of the juggling, had dropped for him to express himself in the way. And there were people at the time saying, oh, God, this is a bit weird, I remember going to a workshop of his when we were all expecting to learn the skills, and we did the whole workshop with one ball and moved our bodies around it. I kind of enjoyed it, but I saw people going, what's this? Now, that was over 30 years ago when I did that workshop, when that kind of happened. Now, Sean Gandini now is doing Philip Glass operas, he's still doing the same thing. He has the Gandini Juggling Project, who travel the world working on incredible things, but the essence has never changed. But the time it took for him he obviously knew what he wanted, and he had to go through that period of not compromising, but then he found his audience. And that audience has grown. And I suppose and I don't mean there's a level of compromise always, isn't there? Maybe, but
sure.
And people like David Lynch, right? So David Lynch comes out with Eraserhead. Now he may have compromised with things like The Straight Story, but maybe that was his own what he wanted to do. But that would have created a tiny audience, right? And that audience grew. So I sort of think about that. It's very different with film and things like that because there's already a huge audience to build on, right? There's already a cult movie following, and you're going to maybe arguably find it. But with magic, I wonder if we can do both. And I don't know. because I'm lose the will to live at close-up gigs at the moment for numerous reasons. But if that allows me to then have this avenue, so I treat that as the day job, as long as I don't do it too much, which has been a problem in the past, and then I can do that mindlessly in a way, even if I do it well, and then either eradicate the need to build an audience, but know that there will, and I'm thinking of the juggling routines I'm doing, they're not skills juggling, I'm putting movement into it and holding my own and going, right, there's going to be people expecting a certain thing, they're going to be disappointed, are they or not, I don't know, but will I find my audience? And I don't know whether that's a wise thing to do or a self-indulgent thing to do or an egotistical thing to do, or is that a healthy thing to do? I don't know.
I can't answer those questions, and you probably can't at this point.
Absolutely not.
But the key to, if I were facing exactly that same series of questions, looking at that same stuff, not knowing the specifics, but just from what you've explained to me, my process would be what it always is. I would take several steps back from it. It would be not me. It would be a persona that I have fleshed out, that I know inside and out. And I would be looking at them and saying, okay, is this A, true to that persona? B, what is that person's intentions? What is the goal that we're trying to accomplish here? And so for me, whenever I was doing corporate seminars, that wasn't my passion. I was really good at it. But it wasn't my passion. It wasn't my passion to be the guy with the short hair, clean shaven, the most expensive suit in the room, and coming in and giving them all of the basics of what they need now. And like I said, like I've mentioned before, when I did corporate seminars, I wasn't just a guy coming in doing mentalism under false pretenses and throwing out some stuff that I, figured out I could say that would make companies hire me. I went in and did research with these companies for 6, 8, 10, 12 months at a time, understood what they really needed, understood how they function, worked as a basic consultant, and then would piece together seminars that would talk about, employee management relations, would talk about sales and marketing, and talking about, growth potential, and talking about so many different things. And the stuff that we did was tangible training sessions. And those tangible training sessions were then illustrated and punctuated and so on and so forth with magical and mentalism pieces. But they were true training sessions. I was really good at that. And, I wasn't just doing like keynote speaking and stuff like that and going in with a 90% or 80% prepared thing and, taking some of it and, adjusting it to their specific company message and being a rah-rah guy. Nothing wrong with that. Great money in it. I just had no interest in it. But when I did that stuff, it wasn't my passion. One of the first things I had to realize was, if I'm going to do any of this stuff, and I'm going to do magic and mentalism presentations in this thing, as you called it, and as I used to call it, in my day job, that meant if I did magic and mentalism there, I had nothing to come home to. And suddenly magic and mentalism became my day job.
Yeah.
So one of the main things that I did was I took certain aspects of magic and mentalism, and I didn't put them into any of those corporate presentations.
Sure.
I kept them for me. So when I got home and I could sit down in this room, I could do the passion. That could be my relaxation. I could still share that with intimate groups of folks and explore those things as opposed to doing them for a buck. So I made a fine division between them. There was a division. This is the shit that I'm going to do, and the skills, abilities, talents, and everything else that I will put into those seminars. This is what I do for me. This is the intimate stuff that means something to me. And having that stuff to come home to was my therapy. That was my comfort. That was my security blanket. That was the stuff I truly cared about. And it's the stuff that refueled the day job because I still had something to come home to. That was a big deal for me. Some of the greatest magic and mentalism that I ever created has never been seen by anybody because I wanted to keep it for myself. It had nothing to do with sharing it for an audience. I have a 2-cup cups and balls routine that I love. It really, really was wonderful. And I showed it to maybe 5 or 6 people in all the years that I did it. The thing I love most about it was that 2-cup cups and balls routine eventually evolved into a 4-cup cups and balls routine. That is my favorite cups and balls routine in history. And no one has ever seen it. I've only done it for myself.
Can you film it for me? I'm being
maybe
facetious.
one of these days I will show to a couple of people, but I loved that 4 cups and balls routine. I absolutely loved it because it incorporated so many wonderful ideas that came from a number of different sources to the point where it became everything from card under glass, because one of the cups is off to the side. The main cups are here, and this one comes into play. And sometimes it has a Cardini aspect that it surprises me and it, quote, fools the performer. You know, the same way Cardini didn't do just standard manipulation of look at how talented my fingers are, but instead it became a storyline. It became passion. It became him being shocked that something appeared at his fingertips, that there was a cigarette there or whatever. There was Cardini aspects to this cups and balls routine that I thought were just beautifully engaging. And I've intentionally never shared that with anybody because I don't want that to be out there. What I've said here is more than I've told people, you know, and now they're going to take and go, oh, I can put a 4th cup in and it can be a surprise ending and it can be a kicker.
4 oranges.
And they'll have taken the whole thing and they will totally have fucked it up completely from start to finish because they have no idea what they're talking about. You know, but that's really the key for me is there's magic and mentalism that will never be seen by anybody because that's what I come home to. There's poetry that I don't care how many people read my poetry. I don't care how many people read my essays. It's not about getting it out there for people. It's about not being afraid of having someone discover it. But there are pieces that I've written that no one's ever seen. Dude, I have shot a number of 2-hour videos down here of lectures and talks that I've given. That I shoot them and I put them in my files and no one's ever going to see them. I shoot them for me. I sit down, I edit them out. I make sure that they're exactly what they want. I go through them once and go, oh, that's good. It's exactly what I wanted. I feel very good about that. Boom, it gets put off on the shelf and it's done. You know, it's about having something to come home to, having something that still gives me that passion. And there is no compromise. But then there's the stuff that I will do for others that I will share or that I am willing to put out there into the world. And there's compromise. You know, folks who do know anything about me have heard me talk about it, unfortunately, and others talk about it for years. A book of mine called Occam's Magic. I stupidly said back in 2003 that I was going to put this book out. I have never put it out. It has gone through tremendous changes through the years. People ask me about it all the time. Is Occam's ever going to come out? Is Occam's ever going to come out? And then I say, oh, yeah, I think I finally decided to do this, or I finally decided to do that. And I keep pulling back on it. Now, Occam's Magic, if you were to go into my file right now and take out Occam's Magic, the finalized version of it is well over 1,200 pages. I mean, there's one version that's 1,600, if I remember the count correctly, but it's well over 1,200 pages, the edited down version. There's no reason to put out 1,200 pages of anything. That's just ridiculous. And so I've gone over it over and over and over again, and I've made changes to it, and I've pulled certain things out, and I've put new things in, and it's just this living, growing organism. Will I ever put it out? I really don't know. I do have folks that have asked me that they want to publish it and folks really want it. And I've made tentative agreements and then pulled back. I now have a version of it that's like 350 pages that if I did want to put it out, I think this says what it needs to say. It has really strong effects in it, has really strong essays. It still has the heart of the project, which is it's still all about critical thinking. It is still all about why I do magic and mentalism at all. And all of that stuff is very essential. It's still all in there, but it's in a much more accessible form. It's a hell of a compromise.
Good afternoon, fellow conjurers, and welcome to Volume 1 of my lecture tapes. I'm going to kick off with a nice little effect I call the Kings of the Ancient. I think it will play well to a high school prom or like a work do. Can you be quiet now, please? I'm doing my program.
So you were just talking about the compromise of the book.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, people that love their books are going to be willing you, which I know is irrelevant because of all we've talked about. Just because some geeky magicians want you to spend all your time putting a book out doesn't mean you should do it. But the first thing I want to say is, if you, and I get this all the time. I've got an idea of a thing that I want to put out because I think it genuinely solves a problem. It's a thing that I think improves a thing that's been out that I've never been able to use because I think it's deeply flawed. And people are saying, you got to do it, you got to put it out. And I'm like, but if I do that, it takes me away from this thing. And yes, I know, and especially for someone who financially, because of moving house, that will make things a lot easier if I do something like that. But the compromise is too great. If it got to having the house repossessed, of course, then you go, right, I'll take a few weeks off that to do that. That's fine, and that's a different thing, and that's necessity. And I suppose it's if you seem to be someone who's fulfilled in the day to day of what you're doing, putting aside the challenges that medically you're undergoing, you are someone that draws from life in a fulfilling way. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I know that. I think one of the differences for me is I'm very content with, at this point of my life, and it's been this way for a long time, that the overwhelming vast majority of my world is inside my head. I don't look to the outside world for stimulation or entertainment or to pacify me or to, I'm not looking for that. I'm not a guy who, I don't need a lot of input, and especially in today's world where people are addicted to input, completely addicted to it. They always have to be connected to something. They always have to have a phone in hand. They always have to be scrolling or searching. They always have to be listening. I've really gotten away from input dramatically because I've learned that the vast majority of people that I encounter have become mental hoarders. They're just like the people who have things stacked in their homes that they'll never, ever, ever organize. They'll never get use of it. They couldn't find something if they needed it. And they just keep putting more crap in their house and keep stockpiling things because, I have to have that. Oh, I have to have that. Oh, I have to have that. And that's what people do now with information. It's what they do now for everything else. Is their happiness, they think, comes from out there. And happiness for me, I've talked about this last time that we spoke. Happiness is a muscle. All happiness happens inside. It doesn't come from the outside. And we think it comes from the outside. I've gotten away from that side of things. And so I'm a really content person in spite of all the bullshit that I have to deal with physically and everything else. I'm a really content person because I have no problem sitting in a room for, 10, 12, 14 hours with absolutely nothing going on. And I just sit here and let my mind do what it wants to do. I have no problem with that. I actually enjoy that. It's probably my favorite pastime is to do that constantly. And I know that I've gotten to the point where there are certain things that I probably need a little bit more human interaction than I'm getting at this point because the medical stuff has made it a little bit more difficult. But there's a tremendous balance that I think that I've been able to achieve whenever I am out in the real world and yet still able to come back home and spend time being completely on my own and by myself. And yet, I have the most perfect relationship in the world with my wife. We are the best of friends. We still fall asleep at night holding hands underneath the blankets. And that's, we've been together since 1989 and we still are that way with one another. We still love being in each other's company like all the time, but we're also both really independent and we're both really creative. And so we spend our time apart as well when we are here. And she works from home. So she's here 24 hours a day and I'm here 24 hours a day. So we could, in a small little ranch house, we could really get in each other's way constantly. You know,
Well,
you want the key to true success in a relationship, a long-term relationship. Tammy and I have been together since 1989, and here's probably the biggest key to having a very, very successful, loving relationship. We only have one bathroom. You stop and think about that. When you have to get ready for the two of you to go out someplace or just everyday functions and going in and out of the bathroom, man, I got to tell you, you learn to coordinate. You learn to compromise. You learn to give and take. You learn that it's not all about you at any given moment. You learn to care about others' needs and wants. Living in a very small house with one bathroom, and with her being home 24 hours a day and me being home 24 hours a day, we don't get into each other's way. We choreograph really, really well, and we both compromise and we both care about one another. And I know that may sound like a weird thing to talk about, but let me ask you a question. If you learn that in life, imagine if you can apply that to your magic, how great it becomes when you deal with your audiences. That's the key. Everything I learn in life somehow goes into my art. Everything that I learn about my art somehow goes into my life. All of that stuff meshes together. So all of a sudden, when I do walk out onto a stage and I do one of my shows, the show is about the relationship that I have with my wife. That's the relationship I'm trying to form with every person in that audience to a great extent. You know, my main autobiographic show, that's this show right here that you see on my shirt. Those listening can't see it, but I've never said the name of this show out loud because it can be read more than one way. So it's a show that
Am I allowed
goes.
To?
You can't, because you'll never say it correctly, because there's no way to actually say what it is. But you can say what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm going to say for listeners, it says a fine L-I, and then it's got an N in brackets and then an E. So basically it says a fine line, but the N is in brackets. And as Rick says, you don't know how to say it right, but just so people have a
right,
visual.
Because that last word can be the word lie or it can be the word line.
Yeah.
And people say, well, which is it? And I say, I'll never say. I've never said the name of the show out loud. I simply call it AFL. But when I do that show, it is an autobiographic monologue. It talks about my life. It talks about why I'm no longer on the road. It talks about what I used to do on the road. I introduce the performance character. It's very much like the Penguin lecture, but a different series of things. And that persona comes out and does some mentalism stuff. And then he leaves and the narrator comes back and talks about him in third person again, and so on and so forth. The most wonderful aspect of that show is when people come backstage to the green room or whatever, and they say to me afterward, I thought I was coming here to see a story about your life. I didn't know you were going to tell me about mine. That's the goal. That's always the goal. The goal is to create that relationship, to open that line of communication and let them see themselves. That's really the goal. And so whenever I say living in a small ranch home with another person with only one bathroom is the key to forming a solid relationship. Yeah, I'm not the guy that's going to, there are 2 parking spaces across the street from my house. You can't park on this side of the street. You can only park across the street. This side has no parking on it. Directly across from my house, between the 2 houses over there are 2 parking spaces. I've never in my life done what everybody else does, which is pull right into the center of both of them so no one else can pull into the space up in front or behind. I'm always very, very conscious to pull all the way up to the edge of the one driveway so that there's more than enough space for another car behind me, because I live in a small house with one bathroom with another human being. I'm always conscious of that other human being's needs, wants, desires. I'm always conscious of that. And so I don't take up 2 parking spaces. I don't do things selfishly. I don't litter. I don't do things that will affect other people in a negative way. And all of that carries over into the performances that I give. That is such an important part of what I do when I walk out onto a stage, that the show isn't about me. Yes, the subject matter is me. But if you don't see you in what I'm talking about, then it's just self-indulgent. It's a waste of time. You know, one of the greatest artists I've ever experienced in my life was someone that most folks will never have heard of, and that was Spalding Gray. Spalding Gray was considered the father of autobiographic monologue. He would come out, sit behind a table or a desk, and had a microphone, a glass of water, and a spiral notebook, and he would sit there for an hour and a half to 2 hours and tell stories from his life. And it is the most compelling stuff in the world to me. I think Spalding was one of the greatest artists who ever lived. He is, you know, you talk about people who have fingerprints on what I do. His fingerprints are all over my stuff, you know, a lot more than any magician or mentalist could ever be. He's all over it. And every time I watch one of Spalding's pieces and listen to one of his recordings, and I miss him so badly, but every time I experience any of Spalding's stuff, I see me. That's really important. Even though he's talking about personal things from his life that are completely outrageous, that would never apply to me, I see me, because the lessons or the underlying theme applies to humanity. That's always the goal. So the goal is always to put myself into that small ranch style home with one bathroom with every member of the audience. Form those relationships by letting them understand that their wants and needs are important to me, and I'm not going to get in their way. I'm going to step out of the way and let them, you know, have their space. I'm going to let them be a part of it. And I used to do that same thing whenever I did Strolling Magic. You know, the goal was to make it about us, not about my hands, not about the cards, not about the coins. Make it about us. Make it about the experience. Because if I can walk up to a group of 5 people, or I can walk out in front of an audience of 50 people or 500 people, and I can have every single person feel like I'm speaking to them, and yet make every one of those people feel like they're a part of this unified group at the same time, that's magic. That's real magic. That's the goal. And people say, well, is that really possible? Go to a Paul McCartney concert. Love them, hate them, doesn't matter. Just go to a Paul McCartney concert. You're going to see, you know, if you walk in on a place that's holding 25, 30,000 people, you're going to look around, and I guarantee you're going to see grown men and women crying.
Yep.
I've seen McCartney 7 times, plus I was fortunate enough to sit through one of his sound checks.
Wow.
And that was, you know, sitting through a 70-minute McCartney sound check was the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me in my life. He comes out and he basically plays 3 songs on every instrument that he's going to use that night in the show. So we got a 70-minute show of material he wasn't doing in the regular show. And there was 100 people in the room. How
did that come about?
I paid a shitload of money.
I thought you were going to say, "Oh, you knew someone in."
In that money case, well I paid a lot of money.
That's money well spent.
It certainly was, and I stood there the whole time and cried because of how important it was to me. But on the other side of things, when I stand there in a McCartney crowd and it's a jam-packed place, like I said, it doesn't matter that it's Paul McCartney. It doesn't matter that how important he is to me or to those people. But looking at it from the standpoint of this person on a stage, he's taking those 25,000 people, and it's personal to each and every one of them. And yet they all feel unified in that crowd. They all feel like they belong. They all feel a part of it. Isn't that kind of what we should be doing when we approach a table of 3 and 4 people? Isn't that Absolutely. What we should do when we walk out onto a stage and there's 200 people? We should try to be doing that all the time, as opposed to, I'm going to do these tricks and everybody's going to applaud me. Oh, no.
You know,
you're playing the wrong game and making it harder on everyone.
Yeah. Do you know what I was really inspired by? And you've just reminded me. So I went to Glastonbury Festival this year, which is, the biggest festival, huge, for those people that are overseas. I mean, it's one of the biggest cities in the UK when it's up, right? It's just massive, and there are hundreds and thousands of performers. And this year I went with my daughter. My daughter's 20 years old, and I get one guest pass. I'm performing, and the guest passes are like gold dust. You only get one. So Helen didn't come this year. Gracie came because she couldn't before. And I said to her, we're just going to see what you want to see. You know, didn't go and see Neil Young. I went to see what she wanted to see. And there was part of me, and they started putting on more stuff for young people, and the kind of the older people are kind of going, oh, this is all nonsense. And there's part of me that's kind of done that in the past. And I went to see the things that she went to see, and I went to see some of the things that I love. Okay. And I was completely open-minded, but trying to quell that part of me going, oh, what's crap's this going to be? Which I wasn't really, and I saw some of the best, not only the best performances that I've seen in so long musically, but also the feeling in the audience you're talking about. And she had the same experience. I think she came and saw things that she was like, oh God, what's this going to be like? But, you know, like Nile Rodgers, she just, you know, loved. And I was inspired because my own judgment was completely obliterated, which I was so sure was true. I was thinking I was going to see these people that were overproduced, that were, you know, for want of desperately want of a better word, but I can't think of one, a bit more shallow, not as deep as the music that I connect with, you know. And I saw vulnerability, I saw humanity, I saw an exceptional level of professionalism and skill, and which touched everybody in that audience more than the people that I constantly go and see again and again, who I still love, you know, in a different way, but I was kind of completely opened up by it. And I came away from that festival, with a lot more music than I had before, which is always a bonus, a memory tied to that music, which is, you know, priceless. But also for my own performances and going, that's fed into it in a very subliminal way. And reinforce that thing that you're saying, is that the way we connect, yes, with our magic, yes, with our chops and what we can do, we need to do that well. We need to practice and rehearse and know we can do it and get to that place. But the way we connect is through those bits in between, the vulnerability, the humanity, the talking about the thing. You know, when you just talked about Tammy, I've got a thing here, one of my notes, how is Tammy? And then can you tell me about the relationship for those reasons? Because whether we're with a partner or a spouse or a friend or a family member, we all connect with what it feels like to connect with another person and be in that space and share that space. I'm someone that struggles massively with, like, I can't queue up for a buffet, right? I have to wait till everybody's done and then go. But so me and Helen have the same thing, right? We both work from home. We have one parking, you know, I'm obsessed with leaving enough space for the other person. I'm not saying this to big myself up, as you weren't, but it's that thing of how do we kind of sow those seeds of good when there's so much, you know, that will affect someone's day, even if they don't know it. And so that, you know, you said, oh, some people, I don't know what you said, some people won't know what I'm talking about or whatever, but we all do, because we know what it's like to share space at any level, and the older we get, we have to do that. And your connection with sharing that and then relaying that to an audience, whether it's that story or whether it's more of a kind of subtle thing, is the only way we can connect with that audience.
Yeah.
Because we can't connect with that audience just through the trick. We can entertain them, as you said, and we can give them a moment, which sometimes is completely what we need to do for that situation.
Absolutely. Completely valid in certain situations, without question.
They're at a normal party, it makes it abnormal for them, it gives them a memory, great. And that's enough. But the deeper thing is that those people will remember that experience. I went to see Darren Brown a couple of weeks ago, you know, huge mentalist in the UK, one of the few that every lay person in the UK knows who he is. The memories and the chat that I was hearing afterwards, yes, they were like, how did he do that thing? But it's all about the journey he took you on between that, the humanity, him talking about life and the things we all think, oh, it's just me. And we kind of know it's not all of us. And I think that's not for everybody, and it's not what everybody should be doing at every minute of the day, but we can seep those things in that create rapport, that make people okay with the fact that we've interrupted their drinks. You know, that and we're aware, and there's a kind of awareness of that we don't want to do it too much. We don't want to do a whole show talking about because then people go, come on, it needs to move on. And we have to fulfill expectations. And I think that fulfilling expectations, sorry, this is going on and on, but hopefully this is a conversation and not an interview. It's finding a way, I think, to either fulfill expectations of an audience or flip them and make sure what we're doing is strong enough to make them okay with the fact that we flipped them. Right? So
I agree. It's funny because expectations are... Man, what a double-edged sword. What a double-edged sword. It's the reason why I've never, and not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's the reason why I'm not a mentalist. It's the reason I'm not a magician. It's the reason why when I was in the corporate world, everybody wanted to put a label on me, and my label was, I'm Rick. That's it. I'm Rick. Nothing more than that. And at best, if I have to be anything, I was a resource. Because if I were if I'd have been labeled a consultant, if I'm labeled even a teacher, if I'm labeled anything along those lines, if I'm labeled a magician, if I'm labeled a mentalist, everybody has an impression of what those words mean. You know, if I say plumber, if I say, lawyer, if I say any of those words, people automatically have an impression. In some cases, it's a very negative one. In other cases, it might be a very positive one. But if I say magician, everybody in the audience has their own interpretation of what a magician is based on their experience, based on what they have witnessed, based on what they have conjured up in their own mind from the little bits and pieces of information that they've pieced together. They now have an impression of what a magician is. I'm not going to live up to those expectations because of my approach. What that means is, as soon as I walk out onto that stage, I'm down in a 5 foot ditch. They've already put me down into a hole that I have to dig my way out of just to get back to level ground, so I can bring them in line with what I wish to share with them. So why do I want to start out in a ditch that I have to climb out of? So, as I always say, for me in my world, labels are for soup cans and titles are for the spines of books. I have no interest because they carry more baggage than benefit. The goal is I'm Rick. That's it. And I don't have to worry about marketing. I don't have to worry about, getting the next gig. Even when I was worrying about those things, I had a very interesting and engaging way to do what I did. And the goal was, the more nondescript I can be, the better. And I think that we sometimes have a problem with taking the shortcuts of being able to describe things. I don't think we talked about this before, but to bring it back around to magic and mentalism again, one of the debates I've had with several friends of mine for many, many years is, this concept of, well, you should be able to describe every magical effect in 2 sentences or fewer. Everything should be able to describe, it in a very short description. I get what they're saying. They're saying, they're going back on what Vernon said and what others have said of confusion is not magic. I get that. There has to be a clarity of effect to a certain degree. But for me, I don't want them to be able to describe what I did at all. Like I said, my opening piece is a 7-minute monologue that ends in a 50-50 chance. It really couldn't be described as to what that is. And so I've always said, if indeed people think that, you have to be able to describe every effect in a very concise fashion, I always throw this at them. Those nights that you go out with a series of friends, and you go out and you have the most amazing time. And you talk about the most amazing subjects, and you reminisce, and you laugh and you joke, and it is the most spectacular time you could ever have. And then the next day you come across a mutual friend who could not join you the night before, and you start to tell them what happened the previous night. And they just kind of look at you with that deer in the headlights stare, because it doesn't really register. And we all say the same thing. We all say to them, well, I guess you had to be there. That's what I want my shows to be. That's what I want my magic to be. That's what I want all of my stuff to be. I want it to basically be inexplicable. I think that's a great word for me. I want it to be inexplicable, because if you can describe what it is in 2 sentences or 1 sentence, then you have just basically turned me into the guy who was doing the invisible deck out in Los Angeles, California. It wasn't about the experience. It was about the effect. And if you're talking about the effect, then I've already lost you. The effect shouldn't be the important part. It should be the overall experience is what you're feeling. That's what you can't explain, because it's inexplicable. And I want everyone to simply say, you just have to see it. Like I know even something is close to, one-dimensional as I would do, because it had to be watered down a little bit because it was going on video. And not that I'm not happy with what it was, but the Penguin Live that I did that you and I talked about last time, even that, because you've seen that, to a certain degree, it's still pretty inexplicable.
Absolutely.
You can't sit down and say, oh, here's what the show is. You can't describe it in a concise fashion. Now, you can say, well, yeah, he tells stories from his life, and then he does some magic and mentalism and stuff. So it's like a combination, but that doesn't really convey it at all. It doesn't talk about going in and out of the different characters, talking about the other characters in third person. It doesn't talk about that transition or the motivation behind any of it. It doesn't talk about any aspect of why I'm there and why the whole thing is about, this is a place where I used to live, wow, I used to live here. Well, not here, but here on stage. It doesn't convey any of that. It gives a surface description that doesn't do it justice. And so if you really want people to experience it, you just have to say, you have to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that because it's great. I'm saying it because it's not just unbelievably simple to explain. No,
well, isn't that why art exists in the first place? The reason
for me,
I think maybe that was the genesis of it. The reason I'm not on about art as in drawings, because they explain things explicitly. I'm talking about the reason dance and art as we see it, whether it's contemporary art, whether it's something we don't understand, it exists because there is no way of communicating it through the words. You can't communicate a dance piece through words. That's why it exists. That's kind of what it is, right? So you can
describe an orgasm.
Exactly. When I watched, again, going back to Glastonbury, different story, 2 years ago, on the Pyramid stage, the main stage where they have all the main bands, in the morning of the Sunday, they tend to have something a bit different at the ballet, or the Royal Ballet. Okay, so, and I'd never seen a ballet, and I said to Helen, I want to watch it, So we went to watch the ballet, and Helen looked back at me. I think I've told this story maybe on this podcast or another podcast, but she looked back at me and I was crying. And she said, why are you crying? I said, I don't know. I don't know.
That's perfect. That's the reason to cry. Absolutely.
And I listen to that music while I'm juggling now, and it takes me, I'm even welling up now. And I couldn't tell you what I was experiencing. What I was experiencing was beauty. The music, the whole package was making me feel this thing. And for me, that was a very different thing it was. And Helen felt that emotion well, but on a different level. And for other people, it would have been, oh, this is a nice ballet. And I think that they were expressing something I couldn't put into words, and it's the same with Sigur Rós, one of my favourite bands. They sing in Hopelandic, which is a made up. I don't know what they're singing, but they're singing. I know exactly what they're singing to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that you're right. It doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to the person if we can't explain it. Yes, on a kind of logical level, if we're doing it, they need to kind of know what's going on, because that's a very logical thing we're trying to mess with, right? They think that the coin's in this hand. It's not. That's a different thing. But if you're creating on a level of art or whatever we're calling it that fulfills us and expressing us, then they're not going to be able to express it because it's too deep, right? The pieces I'm working on at the moment, whether it's with the rings, and these contact juggling rings that I've been learning. You know, I showed Helen, put some music on her shoulder the other day, and she was like, "Oh, I'm feeling really emotional." And it was part of it because she knows the work I've put in, that how difficult I found it for the first 2 years of twiddling these things and not getting anywhere. But some part of it, she said, was just the way they moved to the music, and she could tell that I was putting myself into that movement, not in a kind of big physical way, but there was whether it's a nuance of the face and I think it was because I wasn't trying to. it was just there.
Go back to the ballet that you experienced, and I'll be blunt about it. That moment for you was unbelievably magical.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if magic was that magical?
Yeah.
When was the last time you watched a magician perform? And I mean this in a positive way, not a negative way, because in a negative way, we've all experienced it. When was the last time you watched a magician or mentalist perform and it brought tears to your eyes?
I can tell you because it's happened so rarely.
I can tell you 2 specific times in my life that it happened. So I'd love to hear yours.
Well, okay.
Tell me yours.
So mine is Raymond Crowe. I worked at the Magic Castle with him in February. Part of it was because I wouldn't say he's a magician. He's great at magic. He's got beautiful magic and high skills, but he's a mime. He's a clown. He's a character. He is someone you can't really, unless you know the business, you would maybe say clown. And because of how much I've watched him and because we'd connected as friends leading up to the castle, we stayed with my contingent for a couple of days. So there was that happened. But to see him perform his pieces that I've watched from afar, and he's not dialing it in. He's obviously done it hundreds upon hundreds of times, and he says to me he still loves performing the shadow routine. And we can look at that cynically and go, "Oh, it's got rabbits in it and it's cute, and at the end it's moving because there's a baby in it." But he still says he still loves performing it because you can see, and you can't even see him. You can see a shadow of him, like a silhouette while he's doing it, and it just brings tears to my eyes because it's not just the music; it's the whole thing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing about magic and mentalism is so often for me, it's not magical, because magical isn't, for me at least, once again, my own definitions. Watching that ballet, you're not thinking about how they're doing it. No. You're allowing yourself to be taken into the experience, and you're allowing yourself to create your own interpretation of that experience and what it means to you. And that meaning is inexplicable. And inexplicable stirs emotions, and very often those emotions can bring us to tears. And I think that's incredibly wonderful. I guarantee that's what I feel when I watch many of the silent pieces that Armando Lucero does to music.
Yeah.
There's no one in the world like Armando. No one. I've watched him perform his stuff over and over again, and every time, and whether, and he and I have sat and talked for hours, and we've had wonderful conversations. I haven't spoken to him now for quite some time, but I miss him a lot. But when I was in Vegas on a regular basis, and he and I would get together over at Krung Thai and have incredible meals and sit there and have great conversations, there's no one in the world like Armando. And watching him perform to music always makes me cry. Always. I watched him many, many years ago. At this point, I was going out to Vegas for something, and Tammy was going with me, and another friend was going with us as well. And Armando knew that Tammy was coming out. He had never met her, and he said, "I would like to be able to perform for her if that's possible." And so we got together at the event. He said, "Is she here?" I said, "Yeah, I'll bring her down." We went into a room and closed the door and blocked it so no one else could come in. He set up a small sound system, and he sat there for myself and Tammy and our friend. And he sat there and he did his coin work to music. And I look over at these two lovely ladies, and they're both crying. And I'm crying. And people say, "Well, what are you crying about? It's coin tricks." I'm crying about everything that is inexplicable. That's what's generating that. And to me, that's the stuff that we don't have enough of in magic or mentalism. And my stuff is a lot more linear than that because I'm telling specific stories, but the stories are, once again, they're not only real, they touch on a word that you said earlier that is one that I use all the time. There's a lot of vulnerability in the things that I do. Whereas that's not something that's common in magic or mentalism because we had to play the role of the super being. I can do these super things with my superpowers. There's not a lot of vulnerability. But the greatest superhero stories from Superman on down, the only thing that makes them compelling is whenever there's a vulnerability in those superhuman characteristics. And somewhere along the line, those characters suffer and they have hardships. And so vulnerability is a huge part of it. But a lot of it is just inexplicable. When I watch Armando, he's one of the two magicians that has brought me to tears consistently, plain and simple. And I look at that and I think to myself, that's really, really important. That's important to remember. And it's not because of his sleights. It's not because of his talent. It's not because of his skill. It's because when Armando shows me his hands, I'm seeing his heart, plain and simple.
It reminds me of something that Esther Perel, the relationship expert, that she's written a lot of books on love and relationships and exploring.
Foreign to me, don't know this name.
She's very interesting, and she talks in depth about. There's a TED talk, I think, about successful relationships and what makes. It's all a hypothesis, right? So, but one of the things she said is that to see your partner doing the things that they love independently, to observe that is incredibly magnetic.
Oh, fantastic! Absolutely.
And I wonder if when we see, because when you're talking about Armando, yes, and I felt I met Armando as I was just becoming a magician, spent a week in the same place as him, and we chatted, and I learned so much, and I saw the menagerie and just felt I'd seen things, it wasn't because the coin's under the card. That wasn't the thing. It was part of the choreography of that. But when I think about the things that I see, whether it's a beautiful contact juggling, Michael Motion back in the day, I remember seeing that. I'd seen those moves before, but there was something about seeing him. And it kind of mirrored that thing that Esther Perel says about love, because I'm seeing someone that they're engaged in what they're doing. They're not looking up, sort of going, doing the eye contact with the audience. There might be the odd bit, but they're at one with this thing that they're doing. It's almost like we don't need to be there.
Absolutely.
It's like you're observing, and maybe it's something for some of us, or not all of us, that finds that magnetic, and that stirs the emotion, and maybe there's a primal thing there. I don't know, but it just, as you're saying that, it reminds me of seeing Michael Motion there with doing these beautiful things, but just he's there in a room, and we happen to be watching.
Yeah,
but
I totally. It's funny because I know that one of my great heroes has always been Chris Christopherson. When Chris passed away somewhat recently at this point, it just shattered me. Chris Christopherson was unbelievably important to me and still is. And a collection of years ago now, he put out a live recording from San Francisco called Broken Freedom Song. And he says something on there that's kind of like a little throwaway that he says to the audience. And when I hear him say it to this day, the first time I heard him say it, I actually had to stop the recording because it choked me up. He said, when I sing these songs for myself at home, I sing them a little bit quieter. So if you can't hear the words, yell out to me. And the thought of the greatest songwriter of my life is sitting at home with no one around and doing this for the pure love of it, sharing these same songs with the world, even though there's no one there to hear them. At that moment, he's just sharing them with the surroundings. It's beautiful. It's staggeringly beautiful. It's the reason why, even though I was never the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan in the world, the thing that made me really pay attention, and I always respected Springsteen as an artist, I respected him as a human being, but the thing that made me go, whoa, was Nebraska, because he was making a record that he didn't know he was making. And so there's a rawness to it. There's a pureness to it. There is no one's ever going to hear this. This is only for me at this moment. I can be real. I can be authentic. I can be vulnerable. And I hear those recordings, and the story of how that came about is equally important to the recordings themselves. And the fact that they're flawed, the fact that they're not perfect on the technical side and everything else is what makes them so perfect. Because I get bored with perfection. I get bored with things that are precise. I get bored with all of that stuff. That's, like I said before, talent, skill, that kind of stuff. I'm bored with that stuff. I've gotten to the point of my life, and I know this sounds really harsh, I've gotten to the point of my life that I have zero respect for intelligence. I used to think it was like such an important thing. I now have zero respect for intelligence because it's now so unbelievably accessible. Intelligence in most cases nowadays just means certain people have a better capacity for retaining things. Some people beyond that have the ability to retain and even process things. But everybody has any bit of information that they want at any point at their fingertips. And so everybody's thumb smart. They can get the answer quickly. I'm thumb smart, you know. They don't know, but they can get that answer immediately. They can sit down and go, and they'll have the answer. And so intelligence, it's so common that I have no respect for it any longer. I think it's become this phony identity. I have no respect for it. I've been saying for quite some time, anybody in the world can buy a smartphone, but you can't buy a wise one. And, you know, wisdom is everything, because wisdom means you're sitting down and you are actually processing. You're putting yourself into it. You're putting your emotions into it. You're putting your thought process into it. You're actually spending time taking those ingredients and turning them into this incredible meal. Intelligence is just the individual ingredients, and anybody can get them now. It's not a big deal. So I have tremendous respect for wisdom, but I have very little respect at this point for intelligence, because some of the smartest people I know are some of the dumbest sons of bitches on the planet right now, without question. And they keep getting in their own way, and they're getting in everybody else's way in some cases, you know. And so wisdom is much more important to me than intelligence. And that's where talent and skill and all of those other things fall into line. Is, I admit, I do think, and I don't mean to be that old guy, although what else could I be? But I don't mean to be that old guy. You know, back in the days of my youth, if you wanted to learn sleight of hand, you did it. Now, I don't know if we talked about this before. I suffered my brain injury back in 1996. I started doing magic when I was 5 years old. So that was 1964. So from 1964 to 1996, I never knew another magician on the planet. I didn't hang around with magicians. I didn't go to conventions. I didn't read magic books. I had no access to magic. I had one book that I took out of the library called The Amateur Magician's Handbook by Henry Hay. That was the key to everything. And I would go over every 2 weeks to the library that was across the street from my house, and I would take the book back, make sure no one else had it on the reservation list, and if they didn't, I would renew it, take it back home again. Everything that I figured out about magic came from that book, and that was the key. But everything else came from what I came up with on my own. I didn't have any other resources. Now, what that means is by the time 1996 rolled around, then I suffered my brain injury. Then from there, I go for like 2.5 years that I can't function at all because I have no comprehension and no retention skills. Memory's gone, comprehension's gone, and I have to go through all this process to get anything back to be able to do anything. I never really knew another magician until like around late 1999 going into 2000. So up to that point, I was completely on my own. Everything was just what I did organically. And so I look back on everything that I've accomplished, and I don't look at it and go, look at all the stuff that I did. But I look at it and I go, look at all the passion that I had. Look at all the things that were important to me. Look at all the things that I was willing to put time into. And it wasn't about gathering information. It wasn't about learning new things and always, you know, learning new techniques or having some mentor teach me this, or you put your fingers in this position or anything else. It wasn't about information. It was about, I had the smallest bit of information And I took that and I grew as much as I could from those small seeds. Now, I'm not saying, oh, good for you, and patting myself in the back. I'm not saying that from an ego standpoint. But in today's world, we're so busy gathering more information and gathering more data and getting more of this and more of that and adding more things to our our bookshelves and our computers and our phones. We're always adding things. We're never forced to be creative because we don't have a lot.
No. There's something you just... I'm just going to go and get it now. Bear with me. And for anybody interested in... I've become fascinated with why that is. There's a lot of people disillusioned in magic and not finding that thing that they had before. And I think it totally... So this Dopamine Nation by Anne Lemke, I listened to an interview with her, Stephen Bartlett, on the... what's it called, his podcast? God, it's a massive podcast. Anyway, and she was the first person that explained all that thing of the earned dopamine, the when you have to put work into something, when you have to solve problems, when you have to put yourself out of your comfort zone and struggle to get that thing, which was always the way when you were younger, when you couldn't just, boom, download, you've got it. And all the thing of, the self-working trick requires no skill. And we learn a thing that does it itself. And then we go, why? But I'm still getting the same reactions. What aren't I getting? Well, you're not getting the dopamine, the healthy dopamine, which is earned dopamine.
Yeah.
We're getting that neurotransmitter now too easily. It's like doing a line of coke, right? It's in the moment. It's that thing of, yes, boom, for a few seconds or 20 minutes or half, whatever. But then it goes, and the go bit is worse than the high bit. So if dopamine's not earned, as you're saying, with the constant, we can get this, we can watch this, it's so easy. Then we're always in a deficit because that dopamine hasn't been earned. Therefore, it drops quicker. And I'm not saying that explains everything you're saying because we're going way deeper than that. But it's interesting to me that there is a physiological thing that's happening in our mind when we don't earn what we're working towards, when it's given to us, when it's served to us. And I think AI has its uses, but for it to do everything means that we're going to become redundant and we're going to lose that problem solving, that thing that we go and find and search out and get uncomfortable and get bored when we're practicing it, but we finally get to that thing and say, I just did 8 months of not hard work in one way, but I finally learned that thing. And because I've done that, it becomes precious to me.
Absolutely.
Because it's hard for me. Now, if I was talented at that thing and I just went, and we know that, I talked to diving instructors where my daughter used to dive, the talented kids, and this is in all the mindset studies as well, the ones that found it really easily, they're the first to quit when it gets hard, right? Because they just go, I'm not talented at that. But the people that struggled don't fall at the first hurdle. They know it's the work. They know it's that part of it. And when you speak about, and I'm underqualified to talk about this really, but when you speak about at the beginning of this podcast, the challenges that you've overcome with your mindset, and I don't want to sound militant because it's a different kind of, but it adds character. It adds something that I think has more longevity. It adds something that gives us that happiness as opposed to that pleasure or that contentment. And for me, it's like, when you sit down and you've earned that rest.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It's such a euphoric feeling. Now, I sit down all day because I'm doing this, but when I spent 3 days building a shed the other day because I didn't know what I was doing. It was an absolute nightmare and I despised every minute of it. But the feeling I had when I sat down after doing it was not like the same feeling I have when I sit down every night with Helen and watch something and when I've had a kind of fine, and it's that, I think, isn't it? It's kind of harnessing that and knowing that it might not be perfect. That shed is wobbly, right? That shed is it keeps water out, that'll do, but it's not pretty. But that flawed thing means so much more to me than, someone that does it itself or paying someone, which I would have done if I could afford it, let's face it. But we've earned it. And I think that there's something about knowing that even though we don't think we need that, even though we think we need the shortcut, and sometimes we do because it might not be something that's very meaningful to us, so we just need to get a job done, fine. But those things that do mean something to us, I think we maybe have to go through that for it to retain its value to us.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe. I mean, for me, there's a lot in what you just said there. It comes down to, you said, well, sometimes, we just have to get the job done. Once again, what's the intent? Comes back to that word. What's the intent, But for me, we talked about last time, we talked about me having, 2 guitars, and I can't play guitar for shit. I have 2 nerve damaged hands, and I have a brain that doesn't work to process the information I'm trying to process. I can't do it, So when I failed with the one, I bought a second one. That's the key, is just keep going at it. I'm not a golfer, but I respect those who will, nonstop obsess over golf, because they know they're never going to make it on the pro tour. They know they're never going to be that good. They know they're not. It's not like even playing tennis. I was a tennis player. I was a very good tennis player. But it's not even playing tennis, because tennis I'm hitting against someone else. Now, I will be honest with you. My favorite times in this world with a tennis racket in hand has been hitting against a wall, because it's not about dealing with what they do or don't do. I'm getting exactly what I put into it, and I can push myself. That's where I can understand golf, even though I've never really been a golfer. The fact that I'm never, that these folks are never, ever going to make the pro tour. They're never, ever going to, get to certain levels. And they know that, but they still agonize over what they can and cannot do. And they will go out and they will struggle, and they will try to learn. And just the tiniest bit of improvement gives them that sleep of the just. It gives them that opportunity to have that I've earned this today. And there is something so wonderfully essential about doing things that we will never, ever be good at, that we will never come close to perfecting. Yeah. And so many people are afraid of those things. They only want to do the things they're good at. I have friends of mine who are, card guys, coin guys, or anything else. And I say, well, have you thought about doing this or doing that? Oh, no, I'm going to stick with what I do, because this is what I do well. And I always say the same thing to them. When you first started doing it, you sucked. You didn't do it well way back when. And it really comes down to the fact that not only did they improve at something, but the journey that brought them there helped make them who they are. And very often when we see magicians and mentalists, and I see this a lot, and it really gets me saddened to a great extent. There's a lot of times I see magicians and mentalists, and they're not in their own shows. They're not really there. That person doesn't exist, whether it's the character that they've, not bothered to create and they should have fleshed out a character, whether it's just a caricature or whatever. There's no one in the show. They're just the facilitator. And the facilitator is a boring position, in my opinion. And to me, it always comes down to, I don't care about being good at something. I care about being truly passionate, and I care about learning from it. And I care about, if I'm doing something that is extremely specific, I'm going to sit down and work on a coin sleight. I hate to say it, but it's a waste of my time if I'm going to work on that for days and years and whatever to perfect it, and I don't understand how it affects other aspects of my life. But everything that I do, no matter how specific it is, I understand how it affects other aspects of my life. The time that goes into it, the passion, the patience, the compromise, the acceptance. All of those things apply to everything else that make life so much easier to deal with. Because learning like right now with 2 nerve damaged hands, I can't do coin stuff. When there's no one around here, I take out coins and I do coin stuff for myself. Not for anybody else, just for me. And it's not about it being good. It's not about getting better. It's when I sit down and work on that stuff a little bit, and I'm working with 2 damaged hands and everything else. And I go away with, some days it's better than others. Other days it's really like, wow, that's surprisingly good today. Other days there's no activity whatsoever and it's just horrible. Do you realize how important that is for every other aspect of my life? It changes the way that I view every doctor's appointment. It changes every seizure. It changes every bad episode. It changes every good day. It puts everything into context because I have that metaphor and I understand the process and I understand the ups and the downs. I understand the good and the bad. All of that becomes so much better. All of a sudden, now that can work its way into my art and into my shows, into my presentations. Everything has to connect. If it doesn't connect, then everything I'm doing is a waste of time. And then there are times that things are nothing more than life has been really tough. This can be a distraction.
Sure.
And when it becomes a distraction, it becomes mindless and it becomes something that it's just supposed to take away the pain or the frustration or the fears or the anxiety or anything else, then this becomes that wonderful distraction. And then whenever I'm out taking care of other aspects of life and those fears and anxieties and pains and everything else resurface, I can go into that mindset of what that coin brought me and I can exhale. It all ties together. It all becomes a part of the puzzle as opposed to the picture itself. That's what magic and mentalism is. That's what poetry is. That's what music is. That's what everything that I do is. It's all a piece of the puzzle to give me a full picture of how to cope on this weird ride around that really hot ball of gas that we call the sun, and how I can survive however many laps around that thing we do. And I'm going to deal with a lot of pain. I'm going to deal with a lot of discomfort. I'm going to deal with a lot of anxiety. I'm going to deal with an awful lot of bullshit. I'm going to deal with an awful lot of pressure. And somewhere along the line, those very few hours that I get, because, stop and think about it. We sleep 8 hours a day. The average person sleeps 8 hours a day. That's a third of each day that we exist. So if you live to be 90 years old, that means you're sleeping for 30 years. If you work 8 hours a day, that means you're working for another 30 years. That means you have 30 years left out of 90 that you can do all the things that you need to do. Eat, shop, clean the house, do all of, deal with the doctor stuff, deal with the kids, deal with this, deal with that. You got to put all of that stuff into that last 30 years that you have if you live to be 90. And then there's going to be just a few years left to actually savor. Holy shit. The key to it for me is to take every bit of that conscious time and make it all tie together and be relevant so it all becomes the same thing. That way it's all the same picture. It's all the same game. It's all the same illusion. It's all the same. It's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden life becomes pretty easy and pretty enjoyable. And once again, that's how the magic happens. That's how the new magic pieces come about. That's how the mentalism comes about. All of it has to become a part of that puzzle. So that's life.
Rick, that is a perfect place. I can't top that with anything I'm going to say. Not that would be my goal anyway. But listen, I'm very wary of your time, our time. We'll do it again. I can imagine this being a regular.
You know where to find me, brother.
Off and on camera. Listen, thank you so much. I'll pretend to say goodbye to you in a minute and just say thanks afterwards as well. But this has been a profound conversation. Not, and I'm not saying this just to big you up, but for other people, the inspiration, yes, it comes from seeing what you've overcome and how you're dealing with things, but also the reminder of our humanity and the way we can look at what we've got, what we already have and what we always will have, and know that is way more than enough. I still want to ask you lots about your relationship with Tammy, but we'll do that next time.
You know where to find me, brother. I'm always here.
Yeah, it's a good sign that we never get to my notes. Rick, thank you so much. People are going to get a lot out of this. Have a great one, mate, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, man. Talk at you soon. Take care, everybody.
So thank you, Rick, and thank you, Stuart Davis, for editing, and thank you very much for listening. Remember, please do subscribe to the podcast wherever you get them. Do comment, do share, and let's get this thing out there and, give the people the guests that come on here the attention that they very much deserve. So thanks a lot. Have a great one. If you go and have a look at onlinemagic.co as well. That's how I kind of can afford to do this stuff, just about. And it's something that you must read the reviews of rather than take my word for it, but it's a very special thing on onlinemagic.co and the YouTube channel Real Magic Review. Take care, everyone. Have a great one, and thanks again so much to Rick.